is the story of a man's unprecedented quest to transform his backyard into a 22-hole foam ball golf course. He and his friends knew nothing about landscaping, construction, or architecture, but he was determined to see his plans come to life. Join us and share in this truly unique golf adventure, packed with excitement and driven by a rich family tradition of sports. This is Muskrat Links.
Go, 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 go. Oh, what a shot. Welcome, friends, to Muskrat Links. We have survived the winter. The course is actually looking pretty good. I'm very happy with the way the turf has held up. It's done a great job, so I want to take some time today to get it cleaned up and get it ready for spring and summer golf here again in the yard. So yeah, this video is going to be all about some of the decisions that we made to build this course and take you on that entire journey. There's a lot of other videos on YouTube talking about just, how to make a putting green in your backyard, things like that. And those are great, you can learn a lot from that quickly. But this video is all about the journey, why we've made the decisions, what the course means to me, and things like that. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. This is a one-of-a-kind thing here on YouTube, so please subscribe. We'll be filming some content out here this coming summer, and it's going to be awesome. So yeah, sit back and enjoy. To understand why we built Muskrat Links in the first place, you have to go back and look at the history that sports has played in my family. Going all the way back to when my parents first met in college, they actually met playing water polo, of all things, which is interesting in and of itself, but they went on to start their relationship from there. They had my brother and myself, and that's where we have to talk about our names. My name is Kyler, and my brother's name is Trainer, and you'll notice that those are not normal names. C-U-Y-L-E-R and T-R-A-Y-N-O-R. Yeah, that's not a normal name. We're actually named after baseball players from early 1900s, like 1920s, I think. Pittsburgh Pirates, Kai, Kyler, and Pie Trainer. My parents decided that those would be good names for us, and I mean, they've really defined how we live our life, being that different in terms of just right off the bat, like, what does that name even mean? How do I pronounce it? It's kind of helped define us, and we want to be good at everything that we're doing. We're doing things our own way. We're doing things differently. We kind of have a different path to success that we have to follow. So, I mean, it starts from an early age. So this should give you an idea of how important golf is to my family. This is on June 21st, 1992, which is 30 days after I was born. So my mom, who just gave birth to me, is playing with my grandma in a member guest tournament at Lisbon Village Country Club, along with my dad and a lot of his friends too. This was the best day of golf for the Gauthier family. My grandma got a hole-in-one on a par 3, and my dad got a double eagle on a par 5 in Albatross. And I think he went on to win a long drive, and my mom won low gross for the tournament. But that is how important golf is to my family, golfing 30 days after giving birth to me. So growing up, sports were a gigantic part of my life and my brother's life. My mom and dad always wanted us to be playing something every season. So whether it was, spring, summer, fall, winter, we'd always find something to play. So we bounced around from indoor soccer, outdoor soccer, golf, baseball, basketball, basically whatever we could get our hands on at the time, and wherever we had friends, we would want to be playing that sport. Golf kind of came the most naturally though, just because the whole side of my family on my dad's side, they all played golf. So all of my uncles, my grandma, my grandpa, their grandparents who I didn't know, they all played golf as well. So it was always kind of, a desire to fit in and make that side of my family proud by being good at golf. So my brother and I both kind of gravitated towards golf in our early years. And that was helped along, by my father actually being the golf coach throughout our life. He had a golf hole set up in our yard too. One of my earliest golf memories is we had a family cookout, and I was like, 5 or 6 at the time with my little plastic golf ball, plastic golf set. But we had our hole up on the side of the hill, and I managed to sink a hole in one there, and everyone was so happy. They were cheering for me, they were congratulating me, and I was just a kid, and I was over the moon, of course, with this, attention and feeling like I had succeeded in something. So it just kind of gave me like a sense of belonging with the family. It's just such a great experience overall. And that's kind of why I'm building Muskrat Links in a way. It's just to kind of give, a place where you can go, where you can not feel pressure. You can feel like, you're free to goof around, have fun, get better at something, and kind of see yourself improve. So that's kind of part of the motivation for building Muskrat Links, really, because golf has always been just the great escape for me. Being able to focus on just the game, just your next shot, not worrying about what's happened in the past, not worrying about, what's going on elsewhere in your life, whether it's some stress from family, job, or anything like that. You can just take golf and just compartmentalize it and say, here's what I'm focusing on for the next hour. Here's what I'm focusing on for the next couple minutes, just this one shot, and you can make the most out of it. So that's kind of what golf means to me in a way. And like I said, I just want to give that opportunity to other people in my family, my kids, just kind of give them a place where they can go, be free and enjoy themselves, and just kind of develop, really. So that's kind of part of the reason why we want to build Muskrat Links. My wife and I, we looked for houses for a really long time when we first started looking. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Knew we wanted something that was going to have a big yard, able to have room to play, room to grow into. And that was tough to get around here. There weren't too many houses on the market at the time, so we were being really patient, waiting for something that was going to really pay off for us. And boy, did it ever. We have 1.1 acres. It's basically all flat, which is perfect for golf. And it's right next to a pond, so it doesn't really get much better than that. All right, do I have enough room to hit golf balls here? And for us, obviously, the answer is real golf balls, no. Foam golf balls, yes, definitely. We had used foam golf balls plenty of times before, throughout my life, but they're perfect because they only go like 30 or 40 yards. It just makes for great yard golf balls. So we bought a bunch of them, and I started looking around the yard thinking where would be good places to put some holes. So obviously each corner of the property would be a perfect spot for a hole, and then we kind of found another spot, right here in the middle where we can have a 5th hole. So now we started looking at, all right, well, if we want to put holes there, what should we do? So the easy solution, and anyone can do this, and I highly recommend it, is to just go ahead, get some sticks, dig out a little hole, put the stick in the ground, and call it good. That's really all you need for fun golf in your yard. So starting out, it was just sticks and holes. Just 5 holes around the yard with 5 sticks in them. And that's really all you need, and I had a ton of fun with that. But of course, I wanted to upgrade. That was always a dream, is get something that looks really cool and would be really exciting to play. So the first couple years that we owned the house, I went through and upgraded to PVC holes. So I swapped out the cups for these like PVC couplers that I found at Home Depot. Something like that worked really well for a golf hole, and it was pretty close to the size of a normal golf hole, so that worked out really well. And instead of the sticks, we went ahead and upgraded them to little like 4-foot rebar, 4-foot rebar. Those worked out really well actually, and they stayed in the ground pretty firmly, and I could put them right through the center of those PVC couplers, and it was really nice, and I love the look of that. So I wanted to get some flags that I could put on top of those rebar. So I went online, did some research, and found these little red flags, just numbered 1 through 5, and I grabbed some of them, and it turns out they fit on top of the rebar perfectly. So I went and stuck those on top of the rebar, and at that point, it was a pretty cool looking course because we had 5 holes around the yard with like the official flags in them, with the rebar sticking out. It looked pretty cool. So talking about upgrading that even further, I knew if we were going to upgrade, we had to do something really official. So I saved up a little bit of money, and I thought, all right, what would be a good place to spend this money? Well, we could upgrade to actual flags, we could see about maybe putting turf down to make a putting green or chipping green. And of course we could then put actual greens around these holes, which would look amazing. So then I started thinking about it a little bit more professionally, like, well, I could make an actual course out of this and kind of make hole layouts and assign pars to them and measure them out and get some yardages. And so then, you know, of course, my mind starts racing and I'm thinking, all right, well, if we're going to do that, we're going to need a scorecard. And if we're going to do a scorecard, we're going to need a logo. And everything just kind of, you know, tumbled together from there. And then before you know it, I've got this gigantic spreadsheet in front of me with all this information about what I want to do. And the question is, can I actually do it? I knew I could handle all of the scorecards and the logo building. You know, I'm good with Photoshop. I love the creativity side of things. But I'm obviously not good at the construction stuff, that's for sure. And I didn't know if I could get all the supplies I needed. So now it was time to plan it out. Could I turn this 5-hole course into a reality? And that's where our story really takes off. All right, everybody, let's talk for a second about the tools and supplies you might need for building a golf course or putting green in your backyard. So I just want to go through the list a little bit here, just kind of go down the Google sheet that we made to keep track of all of this stuff, and just talk about some of the things that you might have to find or source from somewhere in your community. So starting out, obviously I have some of the things that I did that you don't necessarily need to do. So we have logos, graphics, this par 3 challenge that never really played out. Don't need a scorecard, definitely don't need any of the pencils or mailboxes or any of the other stuff that I kind of went through. But starting out, obviously you're going to need to figure out where you're going to get your sand and your gravel from. Luckily, I've got a lot of quarries in my area of the world, so I was able to call some companies and, you know, weigh my options, see what was going to be expensive, what wasn't. You definitely want to go through a quarry or some sort of, you know, concrete/sand provider, though. You don't want to order this stuff through Home Depot or any other kind of home improvement store like that, because it's going to cost you a ton. This will save you a lot of money. I was able to get plenty of sand and gravel as needed, getting it delivered right to my house for significantly less money than it would have been shopping at Home Depot. So big recommendations there. First, you have to plan out kind of where you're going to do things, though. So obviously you're going to need to mark out a spot on your lawn. So I used some landscaping rope and some spray paint for that. Just kind of marking out exactly where I was going to place things. I sketched it all up on a piece of graph paper originally, so I knew exactly where things needed to go. Translated that to the yard, and that was really easy. Determining square footage, just going to need a tape measure for that. It's the only tool you're really going to need for that sort of thing. Getting the turf, obviously that's a big one too, and that took up a large majority of the budget. The whole point of this was to try to build this whole setup for less than $2,000, and half of the money went to the turf. So definitely shop around for that. Look for places that are going to give you the best deals on shipping, because again, turf is extremely heavy to ship. So shipping is going to be like at least $100 pretty much no matter where you go. So make sure you save money there, because that's where you're going to be able to save the most money, since that's taking the most money from the project. I think I ended up getting mine from Turf Factory Direct, so I definitely recommend them if you guys are looking for some turf. I think I got some that was on sale at the time. It's probably a little bit more expensive now. But anyway, turf, gonna cost you a lot of money. Other tools, wheelbarrow. I didn't have a wheelbarrow at my house because we're relatively new homeowners. So I did have to buy a wheelbarrow, though that's been super useful in other things. So wheelbarrow is a definite must for moving dirt around, sand around, gravel around. A tamper, something you're certainly going to need if you're gonna be leveling out the ground. Landscape fabric is going to go kind of at the bottom of your putting green as the very first layer on top of the dirt. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. That's the method that I went with. So I ended up going with the clearing out the top layer of sod, putting down some landscape fabric, filling that in with the gravel, tamping it all down, and laying my turf directly on top of that. You can certainly use more layers. You could certainly incorporate some sand there as well. I didn't want to build a super expensive one, so I thought the 2 levels would be pretty good for us, because I didn't want to go too crazy filling this up with 7 different layers of sand and gravel. It didn't need to be that crazy. It's my first one. You're definitely going to need a blade for cutting the turf. I used essentially a glorified box cutter. I went through a couple different blades, just swapping it out whenever I felt it was getting dull. But again, a really good purchase. Buy yourself one that feels kind of nice in your hand, because you're gonna be doing like a lot of cutting and tugging. So it's important that you get one that feels good. Don't just buy a thick chunk of metal for cheap. Your hands will thank you later. Garden stakes and spikes, you're going to need something to hold the turf to the ground and any edging you might do. Garden spikes is what I decided to go with because they worked well and were readily available for me. So I picked up 500 from Home Depot and used them. I still got some left over, so they worked out really well. That's good for holding down the landscape fabric to the ground initially, as well as the turf and the edging around it. So definitely got some good use out of that. Scissors, I got some carpet scissors just because it was easier to cut certain turfs with the scissors versus the straight edge. So I thought that it would be a little bit easier, and it proved to be significantly easier on my hands. I think the thinner turf cuts a lot easier with the scissors than the more expensive turf that I used for the actual putting green itself. That was better, kind of flipped over, cutting from the back with the straight edge with the blade. But the scissors were great for a lot of other things, so definitely a must-have. In terms of removing some of the dirt from the ground, I used just some basic shovels and this kind of ice chop thing I had, which is basically just like a flat chunk of metal on the end of a stick, so you can just chop it into the ground. So I use that for chopping up the sod and then kind of scooping it out with a shovel into the wheelbarrow. Flattening the dirt, laying the landscape fabric, buying the gravel, buying infill. Infill is something you may or may not need. I probably didn't need it for the turf I got, but I decided to buy a little bit of sand for that. I was able to find some sand from Ace Hardware, I think it was. I wanted some really fine sand that I was going to use for infill. Obviously you can use silica or some other kind of manufactured products instead of a natural product. Check to make sure your turf needs infill. It might not. Otherwise that will be decently expensive as well. For laying out the gravel and moving it around, I used a lawnmower and an attachment that one of my friends had. So I got this little kind of green bucket load thing that goes on the back of the lawnmower, and we chucked all of the gravel into that, drove it out to the backyard, dumped it into the putting green hole that we had cut out, and kind of tamped it down from there. So that moves us on to flattening the gravel, of course. So I used a combination of driving over it with the lawnmower, the tamper that we bought earlier, and kind of once we got towards the end, we used a 4x4 kind of dragged across. You'll kind of see that footage later to make sure it was all flat. And I think I mentioned later that you're going to need a level for that as well. I think that's probably the thing I would have gone back and spent more money on though if I could. A plate compactor is really going to do the job a lot better and a lot more consistently than, hand tamping the lawnmower and running a 4x4 across your gravel. So I would definitely go and rent a plate compactor if you don't have one. I think it's probably worth the money, and that way you can get everything all nice and flat. Then you can go in and add the contours to your green after that. In terms of digging out the cups, I just used a cheap garden trowel for that we had kicking around the garage. When you're specifically cutting the turf, I used chalk just to mark the turf where it needed to be cut, because obviously we did like a little kidney bean shaped thing, so it wasn't just a square chunk of turf that we were putting in. So to cut that out, I marked it out with a chalk. That worked great, washed off perfectly afterwards, no worries there. For gluing some of the seams together in the turf, we used a gallon of Robert's 6700 and a putty knife to kind of dump that glue on, spread it around, and then we could stick it together with some seam cloth to go under that as well. So the seam cloth and the glue worked fantastically for that. None of them have come apart yet. I even used it on some of the tee boxes, and they're all still together too, so that works out really well. Going down a little further here, we've got spiking the turf. You'll need the level to make sure everything's the way you want it before you stick it in the ground, and some sort of mallet or hammer to do the spiking. I used a mallet, a nice rubber camping mallet that we use for tent spikes, so it was perfect for those garden spikes. Slammed them right in the ground without bending them or damaging the turf, so that was perfect. As for the edging to our green, you want to use some turf that's like a little higher and a little fluffier than the putting green turf itself, so it kind of sticks out and looks really good. So I was able to find some really cheap, like 12 by whatever you wanted to purchase for length turf that was, an 1.5 inch pile height. So that's what we've got out there, and I will say it looks really good. I cut them so they kind of line up and match the edges together nicely, so it forms kind of the shape around our jelly bean green. And then I used some of the extras for the edging for our coarse greens as well. So yeah, definitely recommend edging. It makes it look really professional, and you could obviously save money by not doing that, but again, it looks kind of cheap. So I'm really happy with that edging. Even though the edging itself is cheap, it makes the project look really professional. As for the last things here, just kind of checking to see what I had left over. I did have some leftover edging and a bit of leftover nice putting turf as well, and that's what I used for the tee boxes for the holes, as well as the kind of green surrounding for the holes. that's pretty much it for the essentials. Just a whole bunch of tools and then the supplies you really need. Otherwise, I bought some foam balls, some cups, some flags to make it a little bit nicer. And again, I rented some equipment from some of my friends and pulled some of my friends in for labor as well, so that was really helpful. All in all, I think it probably took maybe about 30 or so man hours to complete the whole thing. So yeah, not bad at all. At this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, we know what we need to build this golf course, but how does it actually work? So we've got 5 different greens around the yard, and you play from one green to another. Basically, all the different combinations you can make totals out to 22 different holes to play, which is really cool because that gives us a front 11 and a back 11. So I'm going to show you one of the holes really quick and just talk about how it works. Over here, we're heading up to hole number 2. Originally, when we first built these, we obviously did not have the turf in the ground. So the grass was really long by the cups and it made it really hard to putt. So the way we played it is if you get it within a club length of the hole, your next shot counts as being in. It's a gimme. So now that we've added the turf, we measured it out so it's about the exact size of a club. So the radius is a club, and if you get it anywhere on the green or on the fringe, the next shot counts as being in the hole. So the whole concept of this is you tee off from one of the tee boxes on your hole. So we've got a tee box there for hole 2. And another tee box over here for hole 2. So depending on which other hole you're going to, you will throw your ball down on the tee box and hit over to the next hole, trying to get it onto the green. Also, if I didn't mention it already, you have to use one club the entire round. I think that makes it a little bit more fun and a little bit more accessible as well. So this is designed to be played with a pitching wedge. The balls go kind of a perfect distance to really hone in those par 4s, par 5s, and par 3s with a pitching wedge. Obviously, if you use something with a little higher loft, it's going to make it a little harder for you because the holes get a little bit longer. And same thing with lower loft. Obviously, it's going to get a little bit easier, but pitching wedge is perfect for me from what I found. Overall, I'm really excited with how this course came out. It provides a really unique, challenging golf experience that if you just show up, throw down a ball, and start playing, I can guarantee you're going to shoot over par. There's not a ton of trouble on the course, but you can easily kind of play yourself out of a hole by going into the woods or getting stuck behind a tree or behind the house. That's part of what makes it fun, is that it's a big challenge that takes a while to master, and it feels really good when you can succeed on some of the holes that are a lot tougher. Just recently we had a family cookout over here, and I had all my uncles over and my brother and my dad, and we played kind of a little tournament here, and here are the results that you can see. It was so much fun. I can't emphasize that enough, how entertaining it was and how proud I was to kind of be able to show off this course and let it host an event like that, even though it was just a casual game, amongst my family. I mean, that's exactly what it's designed for. So, now that you know the family history, the backstory, how to build it, what supplies we need, let's get into it. We started this project with some careful planning and design work, so I knew the exact dimensions for my putting green and golf holes. I had a nice flat spot in my yard for the putting green, and we staked it out with some wooden dowels and string. Working from our diagrams, we measured and spray painted the outline for the future turf and edging. We wanted the hole we dug for the green to be about a foot wider than the turf on all sides, so that the edging had space to rest on top of the flattened gravel area as well. Breaking ground on the project felt like a big commitment. I remember going through all the planning, thinking that there was no way I could accomplish this, but the pieces kept coming together and I was able to overcome any obstacles that arose. When we started moving the dirt out of the hole, that's when it became real and I knew I was going to see the whole project through. We started by clearing the top layer of grass along the edge of the green, which is ultimately where the longer turf edging would go. I thought it would be easier to cut this out first, so there would be a nice clean shape to work inside of. This proved to be a good idea, and I soon moved on to clearing out row by row of grass from the area. There are certainly more efficient tools that you can use for this, namely a sod cutter or a lawn edger. Not only would those have taken a decent chunk of the budget to rent, but part of the pride I took from this work came from doing almost everything by hand. Was it the most efficient way to complete the work? No. Did my back hurt all week? Yes. But it got the job done, and I enjoyed seeing the progress as I slowly moved across the green, chopping with the ice pick and scooping away rows of grass and dirt. I do recommend piling up the dirt and grass somewhere out of the way yet accessible, as I eventually needed to fill in some uneven areas with dirt that I'd previously removed. I probably could have just left it uneven, but having a uniform depth was important so I could more accurately calculate how much gravel I needed to buy from the quarry. I have a small sinkhole in my backyard left over from when the house was originally built that made a great location to pile up my dirt and grass. That same sinkhole also serves as a hazard on the toughest hole on the course, hole 1-2. Cutting out the areas for the holes on the course applied essentially the same strategy. Use the ice chopper to cut up the grass into chunks, then shovel them out into the wheelbarrow to be taken away. We ended up digging in a highly satisfying spiderweb pattern for the holes, and once the dirt was removed, we raked out any large debris and tamped it down. I got a bit of a scare when digging out hole 5, as the previous homeowner had an electric fence for their dog that left a wire running right through my digging area. If I didn't remember it was there, it would have been much more concerning, but please be safe when you're digging anywhere in your yard. After clearing the area for the greens, we wanted to put down a layer of landscaping fabric. I read that this was an important part of ensuring the longevity of the greens, which seemed like a worthwhile investment. The fabric itself is pretty cheap and available at any home improvement store. It comes in these 3 or 4 foot by however long you want rolls. Knowing this, we did some calculations to estimate how many square feet we would need in order to cover the area of the putting green and course holes. Since I was using about 85% of my turf for the greens, I knew I needed about 400 square foot of fabric, which, for reference, is only like $50. The other 15% or so of turf was going to be used for the tee boxes, and I decided it wasn't worth using the landscaping fabric for those. All we really did to install these is roll out the fabric to lengths that were a little bit bigger than the area, then cut them with the utility knife. Just make sure you're ready to put these down when you cut them, otherwise you're going to be chasing them around your yard if it's a windy day. I didn't strictly need a super airtight solution for securing them to the ground, as several tons of gravel were going to be piled up on top of them, so we just staked down the edges enough to keep them in place. We purchased the 500 mega pack of garden staples, so we had plenty kicking around to use. Once we were satisfied with the staking, we cut around the edges of the hole to get the desired shape and coverage of the fabric. In retrospect, I probably should have cut the fabric so that it hung over the edge of the dugout area just a little bit more, as I have seen some weeds and long grass get through the seams where the edging meets around the greens. I don't know if the landscape fabric would have prevented this, but it couldn't have hurt. Either way, it's not a big deal, and I do recommend using the landscape fabric or something similar to protect the bottom and edges of your hole. This was probably the point in the project where I got the most weird looks and questions from my neighbors. I tend to be very introverted, so the most they ever get out of me is a smile and a wave, unless they try to strike up conversation. I'm not sure what they thought I was building, but I hope they're happy that I raised the neighborhood home values, since our street now has an ultra-exclusive private golf course. Not to mention that it is the #1 ranked full-length foam ball golf course in the world, so you're welcome, I guess. You can pay me later. Out of all the different moving parts needed to complete this project, ordering the gravel stressed me out the most by a large margin. My biggest concern was that I didn't want to buy the wrong amount and have too little or too much. Too little meant I had to pay the delivery fee all over again and look like some chucklehead who didn't know what he was doing, which is partially true. Too much meant I was going to have some massive pile of gravel in my yard and nowhere to put it. And remember how I said I was introverted? So of course I can't stand talking to people over the phone. Asking for their opinions or expertise would feel like I'm wasting their time with my small project, compared to regular clients who need hundreds of tons of material. Ultimately, I spent a lot of time carefully measuring the various depths all around the cleared out pit, and combined that with the estimated surface area. I didn't have an exact number for the surface area since I drew this up on graph paper, but I conferred with several friends who all used different methods to come up with a number for the surface area, and then I averaged the results, putting more weight on the answers of my smarter friends. You know who you are. I then took my depth measurements and applied them to this surface area to figure out how many square feet I needed to fill up with gravel. You would also be shocked at how wide a range of results you will get using different gravel calculators online to determine how much you need to order. Obviously, one of the biggest factors in determining this is the size of the gravel itself and how tightly you plan to pack it in. Depending on where you get your instructional information on putting greens, you will get different recommendations for what size gravel you need to use and how many layers you might need. I opted to keep it simple and just use one layer of material that I could compact down fairly tightly. After all my research, I still don't really know the difference between ledge, gravel, concrete, and hard pack of the same size, so I will leave that up for you guys to fill me in with the details. What I ended up ordering was 3/4 inch crushed gravel with fines. The 3/4 inch, I believe, represents the size of the filter that the stones pass through. Having fines just means that it also has extremely small sand-like particles mixed in and it hasn't been washed. This is extremely important for the project as I sifted out some of those fines to use for the cup installations and adding contours to the greens. After all of the calculations and estimations, we ordered 7 tons of the 3/4 inch gravel. This turned out to be a very accurate assessment, and I only had a little bit left over that I used to build a small ramp into my shed, replacing the existing wooden one that was rotting away. I'm impressed that I got this right, because if you told me before that I needed 7 tons of gravel, I wouldn't have known if that would even fit in a dump truck. I had absolutely no frame of reference, but now I do. Anyone who has worked in construction or transported gravel before is probably laughing at me, and rightfully so. But hey, each person has their own area of expertise, and I'm glad I was able to dip my toes in a new field just for a little while and come out successful. After the gravel was delivered, we had to get it moved into the backyard to fill up the holes we had dug out for the greens. This is certainly the most labor-intensive part of the project, and I coordinated with my family and friends to get some additional help. The most helpful tool here was the trailer attachment for the lawnmower, which saved us a huge amount of labor trying to get 7 tons of gravel to different parts of the yard. This I had rented from a friend, and I can say that it was worth every penny and then some. I strongly suggest that if you don't get your gravel delivered directly to the spot you need it, make sure you have some sort of mass transport option. I'm sure you can rent something like this fairly cheaply, or something like a mini excavator would work well for this too. You could even use it to help dig out the original grass and dirt as well. The concept here is pretty simple. Get all of the gravel to the right location and pack it down as much as possible. I have lots of footage of this part of the project since we spent so much time tamping and leveling everything. Overall, 14 hours of the project was recorded, and about 8 hours of that was just gravel delivery and tamping. I know that it would look pretty cool in the time lapse, so I try my best to capture as much of the process as I could. I'll talk more about the leveling and tamping in a bit, but this piece was also very satisfying. Being able to level out the ground, water it with a hose, flatten it all down nice and compact was a good feeling. Hopefully that comes across in the footage, but we took a lot of pride in making these greens as smooth and packed as possible. My wife even joined in for a bit of tamping on holes 3 and 4, so she can say that she officially contributed to the project while 9 months pregnant. If I remember correctly, this was literally a couple days before going into labor, so we were trying to get as much done as possible to prepare for the baby. I can't tell you how proud I am of the work that went into this course, and how thankful I am to my wife for putting up with us constantly disappearing just to pound a bunch of gravel into the ground when the weather would allow it. Filling up the putting green with gravel wasn't too bad. I think we did it with about 15 or so trips back and forth with the lawnmower trailer. We also quickly realized that we could use the lawnmower to help initially compact the gravel by driving over it as we were pouring it in. So once we started filling up the hole, I drove across the gravel at different angles to try to pack it down with the weight of the mower. It started looking better and better as we covered more and more of the area with gravel. Typically, my dad and I would both fill up the trailer with gravel, drive it up to the green, dump it all in, and my dad would use a bow rake to move the gravel to the right locations. While he raked, I drove the mower back to the gravel pile in the driveway and started filling it back up for the next batch. I got pretty good at backing up the lawnmower with the trailer hooked up to it, and let me tell you, I struggled hard with this at the beginning. I was jackknifing all over the place, backing up in the wrong direction, dumping the dirt in the wrong place, running over tools, you name it. With some driving tips from my dad, by the 10th or so load I could dump the gravel wherever it needed to go. Once the hole was almost filled to the top, we started leveling everything out with the 4x4 and packing it down further with the tamper. Watering the gravel with the hose helped weigh it down a little bit, so it was easier to compact. But you don't want to water it too much, otherwise all of the dust and fines will filter to the bottom, which isn't what we want. This process continued until we had everything decently flat and just a few low points that needed to be filled in. To fill in these depressions, we sifted out some of the fines through an old window screen and used them to pack in the areas that needed it. This continued until we felt we had the whole area decently flat and we started looking at what we could do next. After finishing up with the gravel, it was time to dig out the holes for the cups. I used these large nails to indicate where the cups would go in both the putting green and for the course greens. Doing some research about installing golf holes for turf, the consensus is that you generally want the edge of the cups to be slightly above the level of your surface. That way, when you add the turf on top, the cups will be at the correct height. If you installed them too high, the balls could bounce off the lip of the cup, which would be horrible. If you installed them too low, the turf would end up funneling in anything that got close to the cup. Not the worst thing from a golfer's perspective, but a disaster from a greenskeeper's perspective. In the end, I went with the height of about a 1/4 inch above the top of the gravel layer, and it was perfect. In order to level it, I used some of the sifted fines to fill in around the sides of the cup after digging out the hole. It is also vitally important to ensure the cup is level for essentially the same reasons I just mentioned regarding depth. The end result looked great, and we were ready to install some turf. The day was now here to roll out the turf and start cutting. Everything else was done, and the greens were ready to be installed. Choosing the right turf is obviously a major decision, arguably the most important decision, when building a putting green. As I mentioned previously, there are a lot of turf suppliers out there, so you will want to look at all of these options before making your decision. Some factors to consider include face weight, pile height, material, backing, infill, sun and weather resistance, color, warranty, cost per square foot, and shipping. For me, the biggest factors were cost, pile height, and weather resistance. Think about what factors are most important to you and place more value on them as you research your turf. I wanted to keep this project under budget, and the turf was always going to take up a massive chunk. I knew that if I could procure the turf at a cheaper price, I would have a lot more money to spend on other cool things for the course, like flags, scorecards, extra edging. Pile height was important as well, since I wanted to make sure the turf would be able to take some infill in case I wanted to adjust the stimp. I also needed something that was shorter than the edging to give it a clean, professional look. Given that I live in New Hampshire, we can have some pretty wild temperature swings. Winters are spent below zero and under a good amount of ice and snow, making weather resistance and warranty a big factor for me as well. With all of this information in hand, I chose Turf Factory Direct as they were having a sale on their Putting Elite turf for $2 a square foot. Unfortunately, it was out of stock at the time I wanted to order it, and I was nervous that I wouldn't be able to get a hold of it. I sent an email to their sales department, who let me know that they would have it back in stock in a few weeks, and that I could get my name on a list to have my order fulfilled when the new stock came in. That was good enough for me, since the project didn't have any definite timelines, and it was worth the money I saved. For reference, the 450 square feet of turf cost me $999, including shipping, back when I first placed the order. If I ordered it today, it would cost $1,625 shipped. That's what COVID will do for you. A lot of golfers wanted to build something for their home during this time, and I'm glad I was able to get my project mostly completed before the prices really changed. I read online that it was good to water your turf and let it dry in the sun after shipping, as this helps it settle out and flatten. As you saw, we did this in the driveway before making our initial cut. The putting green itself is 15 feet by 21 feet, and the turf roll we purchased was 30 feet long. This allowed us to cut off a 15 foot by 9 foot chunk that would be used to create most of the greens for the course itself. Even at 15 by 21 feet, the putting green turf was still very heavy and hard to transport. It would have been extremely difficult to carry if not for the little canoe cart I had that allows me to take my canoe down the road without dragging it on the ground. When we got to the putting green area, we laid out the turf and spent some time adjusting it so that it covered the area exactly the way we designed. I didn't want to leave the turf out overnight because it certainly could have blown away while we weren't watching it, so I really wanted to get it positioned, traced, cut, and spiked all in the same day. After positioning it correctly, we spent some time marking out exactly where we needed to cut in order to get our bean-shaped green just right. We already had the area filled up with gravel, and the plan was to have about a foot of gravel extending beyond the outside of the edge of the putting green so that the longer edging turf could be installed. I didn't really have a plan going into this for measuring the 1 foot space, so in the moment it seemed to make sense just to use my foot and place it perpendicular to the outside of the edge of the gravel, shoving my toes under the turf. With my foot under the turf, it was easy to see where the tips of my toes were and draw a small chalk mark. We walked around the outer edge of the green, marking 1 foot hash marks every couple inches or so, until we had a nice line that we could follow for cutting. The chalk worked well for marking up the turf in a way that was not permanent and didn't damage the fibers. There are probably some much better ways to mark the turf more accurately, but this was plenty accurate enough for our project. Although I did have assistance with this, you could easily do this solo as well, so it couldn't have been that bad of a strategy. Once we had it all chalked out, we were ready to start cutting off the edges. It was essentially going to be 3 large cuts, a top left corner, a top right corner, and a wavy looking chunk that ran the length of the bottom. At this time in the project, I hadn't yet purchased the heavy duty scissors, and our hands paid the price dearly here. It might not look too bad in the footage, but cutting this was difficult. Both our wrists and hands were sore for almost a week after this, since it was such a repetitive motion that dug into our fingers with a decent amount of force. Ultimately, we got the job done, the chunks started falling away, and our green took shape. We had a carefully laid out plan of how we were going to use the extra square footage from these chunks, so we set them aside and saved them for later. This was another one of those shots that just looked so cool on camera after we filmed it. As we pulled aside the turf chunks, exposing the gravel underneath, it just looked like the green was glowing. Now that the green was set, we went through and did one final tamping and added our contours. I figured that because we didn't use a plate compactor, there were going to be some natural contours to the green, and I didn't go crazy adding contours of my own. I figured the green didn't need any help in that department, so we simply adjusted a few obvious areas and filled in any areas that were disturbed while dragging the turf around. We staked down along the edges and packed our supplies for the night, a job very well done. Lastly, I want to show you guys this really cool Muskrat Lynx hat that Sarah got for me. She's the one you've been seeing this entire time help me out. She took our logo and turned it into this really awesome hat, and I really needed a new hat too, so this was perfect. I love it. The 15-foot by 9-foot chunk of turf that we cut from the original roll was enough area to create about 3.5 greens for the course, and we marked the back of the turf so we knew what went where. The rest of the greens would come from corners that were cut off the larger putting green. We labeled some of the larger pieces salvaged from each chunk and then Tetrised them together to form the smaller greens. As you can see, we were able to get A through G out of this plan, and then we just had smaller sections left over in between these lettered chunks that form little triangles. Ultimately, these triangles and the other leftover polygons would become the tee boxes. We used a couple of these letters to round out one of the greens, and the final green had to be constructed completely out of smaller pieces. As you can see, we utilized B, D, E, F, and then scavenged a few smaller pieces, H and I, to complete this green. We also had one decent sized 3x2 chunk left over, G, that was used as the tee box for hole 4. So that was the plan, and it was now time to start cutting out all of the shapes and attach them together. My garage kind of turned into a turf war zone at this point, with chunks all over the place marked with different letters and numbers, but there was a strategy to the chaos. I screwed a couple 2x4s together to form a trough in the middle that I could wedge the utility knife into. This allowed me to lay the turf on top of it to cut smooth lines. Cutting the turf was a fairly arduous task that I will again blame on not having the exact tools for the job. We were still using the utility knife to cut in the 2x4 trough to make our initial straight lines, but at this point our hands hurt enough that I looked for other cutting options. The cheapest solution to our problems was to buy some heavy-duty scissors used to cut carpet and small wires, and these did a pretty good job at cutting off some of the excess backing for the turf. The scissors weren't any better than the utility knife at cutting the turf itself, so we were still stuck with that for now. Despite the sore hands, it was pretty cool seeing the plan come together through the chaos. As we cut more and more turf, our pile of usable shapes got bigger and the scraps got smaller. I wanted to try my best to keep the lines as straight as possible, since many of these pieces would need to be Tetrised together to form parts of the course greens, and I didn't want bumps and cracks in the greens where we attached everything together. I knew that I wanted to have the best looking greens in the front yard, since that is what people would see from the road. Because of this, we used the larger single pieces from the original turf roll for the front yard greens, and the piecemeal greens for the backyard. To be fair, they all ultimately came out looking really good, and we could have easily gotten away with using the piecemeal greens in the front yard. I'm glad we had that plan though, as it was still a bit stressful trying to line up all the edges perfectly. Once the pieces were cut out, we lined them up in the garage, making sure the straightest edges were touching each other in the middle to create the smoothest greens. As you can see, the green closest to the camera is made up of 3 3x3 chunks from the original turf cut, an L-shaped piece up in the corner, and a 2x2 chunk which formed an entire 6x6 green. With everything cut and organized, it was time to glue them all together. We grabbed our bucket of Robert 6700 plastic putty knives and seam tape and went to work. I tried my best to purchase seam tape that was as wide as possible so we had the most surface area to hold the two sides of the turf together. In this same vein, we went pretty heavy with the glue as well. We probably didn't need to use this much, but we layered that stuff all over the seam tape to give ourselves the best chance of a permanent hold. We were very careful to try to line the two sides up as evenly as possible since there wasn't any room for error. I also had plenty of bags of pellets laying around, which we used to weigh everything down once we were finished gluing. These took several days to dry, and we had to sacrifice most of the garage for this. Looking back a year later, all of these greens are still 100% intact, nothing has bubbled or bowed, so in hindsight, we did a pretty good job here. That accounts for the coarse greens, but we also took this time to cut all of the edging. I mentioned before that this was some cheaper fescue that you could purchase by the foot from Home Depot. Knowing we were going to chop it up anyway, we ended up getting a really good deal on the end of a roll that they would have otherwise had a hard time selling. This edging was much easier to cut with a utility knife, so we marked the back with chalk lines every 12 inches and started cutting them into strips. The theory was that we could probably line them up with each other on the putting green, cut matching angles where they met, and round them off so they didn't look too blocky. When we finished cutting the edging, we loaded up all of our strips into the wheelbarrow and took them out back to the putting green. Our basic plan was to line them up so the edges overlapped the next piece of turf while still being snug up against the putting green. We would then chop off the matching angle where it met the previous strip of edging and attach them together with the landscape staples. We put in a few staples along those edges, a few along the front where it met the putting green, and a few along the back where it met the grass just past the gravel. With that laid out, all that was needed was to cut curves into the edging so it took on that nice rounded shape we expected to see. There wasn't really a science to this cutting, just try to round everything off and make sure it's nice and smooth. One thing that is worth noting, however, is that you want to make sure the edging is placed with the grain going in the same direction. I decided to have the grain lay towards the center of the putting green, so if you wanted to chip directly on the fringe, you would be chipping with the grain, not against it. After all was said and done, the putting green looked really good. I was surprised at how professional it felt, especially considering this is the first time I'd ever built something like this. Oh, and I've only chopped up one piece of edging with the lawnmower so far. Certainly be careful of that, and use a weed whacker to cut down the grass near your green. You may also notice at this point that we already had cut out the holes for the cups and installed them. I'll go into detail about this process in a bit, but you can start to see how nice the putting green is looking as it comes together. True to plan, we had enough edging to cover the whole perimeter of the green without needing to dip into the remaining edging set aside for the coarse greens. We used the same proven technique on the coarse greens that we utilized on the putting green. The only exceptions were that we needed to dig out a little ring around the turf to pack in with gravel to help keep the weeds down, and we decided not to round off the edging. Originally we planned to round them off just like the putting green, but I really liked the way the octagons looked, so we decided to keep them as is. Let me know what you think. Do they look good, or would they look better rounded as well? The edging worked perfectly for the coarse greens, helping to stop balls from rolling off easily, but balls hit with any pace will still roll up and over as you would expect. I feel they properly reward good shots and punish bad shots. In terms of cutting the holes in the turf to reveal your cups, I have a couple tips here. I found it easiest to cut little X shapes out from the center of the cup and then just go around the outside of the cups to remove them. Just make sure to keep your blade tight to the outside of the cup, otherwise you will cut too much turf and have a gap in between your turf and your cup, which would play poorly and look bad. Once you get the turf removed, use little picture hanging nails to secure the turf around the outside of your cup. Don't jam the nails in too firmly though, as they could go all the way through your turf. Installation of the coarse greens was another satisfying time lapse. We gave the gravel a final tamping, then lined up our square greens to cover the gravel area. Next, we marked our circle with chalk, using the edge of the gravel as our guide. A quick shear and we peeled away the outer chunks to reveal our green. At this point, it looked nice and circular, so we stapled it in along the circumference. This happened before I had purchased the upgraded flag sticks, but we still wanted to cut out the holes, even with the rebar. We went ahead and did the coarse green installation for the other 4 holes in the yard, and you could really start to see how nice this project was turning out. Muskrat Links was beginning to feel like the real deal. One of the cooler things we did for the putting green is spray painting some stenciled trees and animals on the toppers for the flag sticks. I have early childhood memories of this exact style metallic putting green topper, so I knew I had to buy them for this putting green. I found them on Whittick Golf's online store, and since they were the only company that seemed to carry them, I also bought my flag sticks from them as well. These came out way better than I expected with the spray paint. The images are nice and crisp and have held up well to the elements. Since we had leftover turf, I wanted to make tee boxes for all of the holes on the course. This would allow me to clearly identify where people should be teeing off without having huge chunks of my yard getting destroyed by repeated use. The process for installing these is pretty similar to what we had done before. Mark the size of the area, dig out the grass and dirt, fill it with gravel, tamp it down flat, lay the turf back on top, staple it down, and tamp the edges so that it looks smooth. One critical step here is making sure not to put any staples where people could hit them with their club. I stapled the back edges and about halfway up the sides, but not the front sides that point to the other holes. So far so good, they have held up over the winter and through about 100 or so rounds of play. Moving on to the infill, I spent a lot of time trying to find out what I was supposed to use for my turf because I didn't want to ruin my $1,000 investment by dumping the wrong sand or silica on it. It ended up being difficult to pinpoint what to use, and I didn't really want to buy anything synthetic since they were all very expensive compared to sand. I needed to figure out exactly what size grain I needed, then try to find a brand that offered the same grain size. I learned from various websites that I was looking for something smaller than US standard filters sized 30 to 40-ish based on the properties of the turf I purchased. This meant I was looking for sand in the fine or extra fine categories. One site that I found that had really good data sheets was PW Gillibrand, but I didn't really have access to purchase from them at all in my area. After some more digging, I found that Ace Hardware would ship Quickcrete fine sand to the store down the road from me. This sand listed that the predominant size range was in between US standard sieve numbers 30 to 70, and that was good enough for me. I jumped on the opportunity since I didn't have any alternatives at the time and bought a bunch of bags. It is likely that I could have purchased this from a local quarry as well, but none of their websites had any sieve or size data readily available on them, and I sure as heck wasn't going to talk to somebody on the phone about this and then just buy a couple 100 pounds of the stuff. By the time we got the sand and were ready to brush it into the putting green, the baby was ready to make an appearance as well. She was always curious as to what we were doing outside and wanted to be brought over for a closer inspection. She got to witness arguably the most satisfying part of the project, push brooming the sand into the turf. There's something really cool about dumping huge piles of sand all over the green just to brush it back and forth a few times to make it disappear into the fibers. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot of work since the push broom easily grabs the turf and doesn't want to slide across it, but it was well worth it. For those of you who aren't aware, typically adding infill to turf helps in a few ways. It will help the fibers stand up more, add weight to the turf, it can increase drainage depending on what you use, it will certainly increase durability, and for golfers, it also increases the stimp. Stimp is essentially just a value that represents how far a ball will roll on the green when released at a certain angle down a ramp of a certain length. It's pretty cool, so certainly look it up on YouTube if you have the time and are curious. I wanted to keep a little sand in the garage in case I needed it later, but we used a few of the remaining bags to make a sand trap in front of hole 2. There was a natural little indentation here anyways, so it made sense to turn it into a course feature. We didn't dig out all the dirt and grass here, just tamp some gravel down and rake the sand out on top of it. That pretty much wraps it up for construction. I think it's finally time to view the finished project. Please allow me to present the world's first full-length foam ball golf course, Muskrat Links. Absolutely pristine conditions. Eagle opportunity here with the course record in play. It's Muskrat Links. We're going for it. Well, Muskrat Links turned out to be a fantastic experience where I pushed my creative boundaries to come out with an end product that is truly unique and will be enjoyed for years to come. In the short term though, I've got a lot of content I want to make out here on the course, as well as in the garage on my simulator. I got into simulator golf only recently, and I was hooked. I don't have a lot of time set aside for golf, and the convenience of a home simulator is unrivaled. I won't bore you with the details of this other project, but I was recently able to complete my simulator garage build, which includes a SkyTrack, a custom enclosure, an impact screen, projector, and a computer to run TGC 2019, so we can essentially play any course in the world whenever we want. I'm super excited to bring you content this year. Here are just some of the things I have planned. Of course, we're going to be playing Muskrat Links, featuring every hole, hitting cool shots, hole-in-one challenges, and especially trying to beat the course record. It currently sits at 3 under for a full 22 holes, but I think I can beat that with a little practice. I'll show you some good golf, bad golf, and everything in between. We will especially focus on some of the mental aspects of golf, as this is one of the strongest parts of my game. One of my favorite things about golf is just the opportunity to hit great shots. You never know when it's going to come, so you really have to focus on doing your best with the shot at hand. You know, we've got a really good round going right now, so if we can get this down anywhere close, it's going to be great. We're in a little bit of trouble though. We have to hit kind of a low hook around the bushes and under the trees, so let's see what we can do. All right, we'll take that, let's go. Off the Deck is a series where each card in the deck represents a specific item from my garage that I will use as a club, and each suit represents how to use it. Inspired by some of my favorite YouTube series like Air Japes' Deck Decider FIFA series from about 6 years ago, and of course Wheel of Not Ideal from GM Golf and the rest of the Good crew. This challenge is going to be a ton of fun and will be hugely entertaining to watch. Alright, bit of a stinker so far, but short shot left, we can definitely handle this. Let's hope for a high card though, that's all we really need. Here we go. 2 of clubs, are you kidding? That is the giant nail once again. We can still do this though. It's not that tricky. Close shot, close range. Flick it up onto the green. Here we go. No. We will also be doing a simulator trick shot series. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but each episode we will set up a couple of trick shots featuring miraculous escapes, bank shots, and hole outs. It is sure to be frustrating for me and crazy fun when we finally hit the shots. All right, for this simulator trick shot, we are here at TPC Sawgrass, hole number 17, as I'm sure you guys recognize, but this time we are not going for the green. We are going for the little tiny island in the center, and we have to shoot right down the chute in between the grandstands to do it. Can we do it? Let's see. It's on the right line, but it's short. Dunk. Hold the phone. Hold the phone. No! It was in and out, on and off. Oh, that's a very bouncy green. This could be trickier than I thought. Well. Wait. No! No!
All right, let's try that again.
Off the wood. If I'd have gone another 2 inches, that would have been in the grass and we would have been fine. Oh my gosh. Now, the series I am most excited about, and you should be too, is a fully custom designed simulator golf league. What I mean by this is that each week we will play against some of the best names in golf, putting our scores up against theirs to see how we compete. There will be cash prizes, qualifying, and points up for grabs each week in a quest to reach the professional levels where the prizes are huge and the competition is fierce. My friends and I built out a custom script that simulates what the world's best players would shoot on the same courses that I play each week. It is all based off of PGA Tour advanced metrics from the past year, and through countless hours of design work and scripting, it is finally ready for action, and it's remarkably accurate. This series is going to be elite, and I cannot wait to put myself up against the best and see if I can work my way up to the ranks of the tour.
There's an immense amount of pressure. It's riveting, it's drama-filled.
Watching him on the range earlier, and boy, he generated some speed for a slender guy.
Clearly supremely talented, but just getting used to golf at this level, as Don was talking to us about.
And playing against guys he's only seen on TV and idolized mostly. And it's one thing to have the game to be able to hang with him, but it's another thing to feel like you belong there. And he obviously is feeling like that, because this is an experience for him that could be career and life changing. And he's holding his own nicely.
I hope you enjoyed the Muskrat Lynx original film. I couldn't be happier with how Muskrat Lynx came out. Please remember to subscribe and leave me a comment with what you think of the build, what I could have done differently, and what sort of content you want to see filmed here. I greatly appreciate your support. Have fun out there, everyone.